In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, family. Welcome to America in Black and White, where we don't just tell stories, we preserve legacies. I'm your host, Charles King, and tonight's episode is a masterclass in resilience, leadership, and transformation. Our guest is a man who has risen from the loading docks of FedEx to the executive suites of corporate America and the halls of federal leadership. He's a strategist, a servant leader, a boardroom visionary, and most importantly, a truth teller. Reginald R. Mebane has spent over 4 decades leading change across sectors from FedEx to the CDC, and now as vice chair of the Family Health Centers of Georgia. He's also an author of The Ghost at the Table, a powerful memoir that lays bare to journey of surviving life, the streets, and corporate America. Tonight we'll explore his leadership, philosophy, his commitment to health equity, his voice as a speaker, and why Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist and orator, remains the most influential figure in his life and career. This is more than an interview. It's a blueprint for rising, leading, and inspiring, no matter where you begin. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reginald Mebane. Hello, sir.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. How are you?
I'm doing exceptional on this cold winter Georgia evening.
I know that's right.
It
Ooh,
just changed.
this bipolar weather is too much. So, is there anything you'd like to add before we get into the show?
I'm just glad to be here. Thankful to be alive and thankful to be able to continue the journey and make life a better place, not only for me, but for others.
Yes, sir. So, what I like to do first, when in starting, I like to go into your work as an author, and let's talk about this new memoir that you have.
Okay.
Can you tell us what inspired you to write The Ghost at the Table?
I've always considered myself somewhat of a writer, and I actually wrote this book about 6 years ago. But because I was in the federal government as a senior executive, I decided not to publish it until after I retired from the senior executive ranks in February. But I wrote it about 6 years ago, but I've been writing for a long, long time. The first book that I wrote actually came out in 2001. And the name of that book was I Wish Cotton Was a Monkey. Came out in
Oh,
2001. There's a story behind the title, real quickly. There's an episode of The Little Rascals, and sitting down in the curb, and they pick up a lamp, and it's Aladdin's lamp, and they see an organ grinder's monkey. And so Spanky starts rubbing the lamp and says, I wish Cotton, who was his little black friend sitting next to him, was a monkey. Cotton roams away. There's an explosion in the background where they're demolishing some building, but the monkey has escaped, and he's sitting by Spanky. Spanky opens his eyes, he thinks that's Cotton, and he's chasing him for the rest of the episode. Well, similar to us chasing our ghost, he was chasing the monkey. And that's kind of the theme of the book that has translated into The Ghost at the Table. So that came out in 2001. And I also wrote a small pamphlet called Black Survival in the Corporation around the same time. And one of the stories that I'll include in The Ghost at the Table was included in an anthology, several anthologies. Number one, it was Erotic Noir, which came out in 2001 as well, and A Different Shade of Sex, which was an anthology as well of Black erotic writing. And mine was kind of a joke in the sense that There's a story about this young lady who decided to charge me walking past her house, coming home one day. She was charging people to walk in front of the house like a nickel. I wasn't going to pay. And come to find out, if I wasn't going to pay, she asked me to kiss her, which is the love part of the story. I said, no way. So at the end of the day, it was going to be a fight. And I wasn't supposed to fight women, but I couldn't tell you at that time exactly what I was fighting because it was all a blur. The next thing I know, my dad is standing in the street and he says, meet me at the house because I told you not to fight girls. But that I was trying to explain to him that really wasn't a girl. I don't know what it was, but come to find out she had a crush on me. And that's the love part of the story. So and the name of that back then in the anthology was Dirty Diane, and I changed the title in The Ghost at the Table to add more details. And now that story is in the book, and it's Dirty Don. But it's a love story. People show love in different ways, and that was her way of saying, "Hey, I like you a lot. If you kiss me, you don't have to pay."
Oh, wow.
So that was then. So I've been published a couple of times. But when I was going through the top secret clearance to become a senior executive in the federal government, I got a very interesting call. The person said, we really want to hire you to come to the federal government as a senior executive. We've looked at your books that are out on the market. And in order for you to be able to get hired as a senior executive, you might want to take those books off the market for now. And here was the first rule that I learned in terms of survival. In order to be able to change within, you got to get into the system. So I took the books off the market. I made it through the top secret SCI clearance process, and I've been an agent for change ever since then. So I've been published several times, and I was also writing her pen name back then. So I've been able to continue my writing, and I write every week, and it's a discipline for me. But I'm happy to be able to publish the book now, which I wrote 6 years ago.
Oh, wow. So, can you tell us, how do you decide what parts of your story to share?
I think that everybody has a story to share. Everybody has a story to tell. And so I've been in this film inside my head my entire life. And so at the end of the day, I thought it was a good idea to be able to talk about not only how we all face struggles in our life and how we all are recovering from some trauma in our lives, to be able to share that with other people, be able to share the lessons I've learned and the failures that I've encountered so that I can hopefully help people not to make the same mistakes. So the idea has always been percolating in my mind and it's finally come to fruition. But the entire story, the unadulterated truth, I think, and also more importantly, what lessons have you learned from your failures and successes, the two hardest things for us to master in our lives, and share that with other people. My philosophy is work hard, do good deeds along the way, and send the elevator back down. I honestly believe, Charles, that that's why I'm on this earth, to be able to share whatever I have. I learned that lesson a long time ago from my mother. We were very poor. We lived right across the street from the Dixie Homes housing projects. And my mom would invite people in off the street. She would give our food away and sometimes even our furniture. And she would even invite people in off the streets to come stay with us. And we were, as little kids, we didn't understand why she was giving our stuff away. But what she was teaching us was that no matter where you are and what your station in life, you have an obligation to help others. And I believe that's why I'm here. I'm a strong believer in mentoring. I've been running mentoring circles, and I think that that is the way we create legacy and inspire others to overcome challenges, is to mentor. And I believe it is not just something you do at work. Mentoring is a way of life. So I gathered those lessons from my mother, who was a survivor from personal trauma, as well as seeing her giving things away that we didn't even have to give away.
So, in this memoir,
Mhm.
so is it are you talking more so about just life lessons, or are you wanting people to get the is if I don't know if this is supposed to be partial biographical or whatever have you, but what exactly are you trying to have people to learn from this memoir?
What I want people to learn is that if you start at the bottom of the hill, if you start behind the eight ball, where you are born does not necessarily dictate what your destiny will end up being. And even though it's my story and my life, everyone should be able to identify with some aspect of the struggle. Lessons about resilience, lessons about failure, lessons about facing hardships and challenges. Everybody has a story to tell. And so not only do I tell my story, but I tell it with sometimes dark humor. I tell it with some profound insights. But in the end, especially as I summarize the end of the book, it's all about the lessons that you learn. You know, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to change the system, you first got to get into the system. And I think for us to be able to change systems, not only at work, but in the world, you have to be a part of systems, fraternities, sororities, churches. That's how you effectively make change. And the first rule of survival in the book is to first and foremost survive. I'm no good to anybody dead. So I got to learn how to, over the years, use the emotional intelligence and social intelligence skills that I've learned and to be able to come into any environment, do an environmental scan, that internal GPS that is inside all of us, that voice, that ghost at the table that follows us around. You have to learn to listen to it. It can be your greatest friend or your greatest enemy. It could save or it could get you killed. That ghost inside of us, being with you all the time, learning to listen to that voice and to maneuver through life and get the social and emotional intelligence skills to be able to be successful in any environment, not just to be successful, but to thrive. That is a skill, especially as you're coming up through the ranks in corporate America, where you have to be able to go into a room, do that environmental scan. And when you're in a meeting, especially in corporate America, when there are high stakes on the table, you could say the wrong thing and it could end your career. So the
That is
same lessons that I used and learned in the boardroom are the same lessons that I learned on the streets of Memphis, Tennessee, the hard streets of Memphis, Tennessee. My my first girlfriend, her brother was a pimp, and I didn't know it at the time. And my mom would tell me, "Stay away from those people," you know. But you know, the more she told me to stay away, the more I went over there. And there was one of the brothers who was I called him an Oldsmobile.
mm,
He didn't have a Cadillac, he had an Oldsmobile. So and I would see him going out at night and they all dressed up, you know, and I said, "Well, you know, where you all going?" They said, "Well, we work the night shift." I said, "Well, I want to work the night shift. Looks like it's a pretty good gig." But he would pull me aside at times. He would call me young blood. He would say, "Young blood," you know, he would teach me these lessons, like I was just telling you. You know, first of all, you got to learn how to survive. Then you got to learn how to follow the money and make the money work for you. You got to take care of your family. You got to build alliances, and you got to understand that you know a person with a title doesn't necessarily have the power. But in the end, it really is about taking care of your circle and creating that circle of trust and that circle of vulnerability that follows you for the rest of your life. Now, those lessons on the street translate into the boardroom as well. Go to any boardroom meeting. Who do you have? Major players at the table, supporting cast around the wall. Saying the wrong thing, not understanding how the money works, not being able to follow your instincts and have emotional intelligence about being able to read the room could cause you your career. And your career could die at any given time. Same lessons from the street apply to the boardroom.
so like let's go back to your going back into the federal government when you decided to do that. And I want you to tell me what was your whole thought process in doing that, because let me just tell you, I too was once a federal employee. I was at the
Hmm.
Department of Labor. And I want you to know this. That experience was one that was second to none, and I don't miss it. And it got to the point that I honestly decided that despite the money that was being earned, it was not worth doing. It was not worth doing. And so, can you tell us what was your thought process in going back into that?
Well, let's first start with before I went into the federal government, starting working a night shift at FedEx for 20 years and moving from the loading dock to becoming a ramp agent to becoming a team leader, becoming a manager, a senior manager, director, a chief operating officer of a $2 billion organization. Working a night shift for 20 years. While I worked a night shift, I got graduate degrees. I was a psychotherapist in private practice for 10 years, got a certification in clinical hypnosis, worked with gang members and sexual trauma victims, gave up my private practice and my teaching to travel around the world for FedEx internationally. And let me tell you this, I am forever grateful for my experience at FedEx which gave me the foundation in terms of leadership that carried me forward to today. And by working a night shift, I was able to do those other things, become a psychotherapist. I was able to be able to teach at 3 different universities: Georgia Tech, University of Memphis, University of Buffalo. But after 20 years in corporate America and working the night shift for 20 years and ultimately moving to the day shift and becoming the chief operating officer of a $2 billion company, I had the opportunity to take an early retirement. And as much as I love FedEx and as much as I'm grateful for FedEx, I do not miss that life. Now, absolutely positively overnight. And by the way, if you ever watch the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, you'll see me in the party scene when they rescue him from the island. They want a real FedEx executives. The best people and some of the best leaders I met in my life and that I learned from at FedEx. I'll be forever grateful to Fred Smith for founding that company and giving me that training, that insight. But I don't miss it. So I was given the opportunity to take an early retirement, and a recruiter reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to become a senior executive in the federal government?" I said, "I don't have any idea what that means." She said, "There's a branch of executive management in the federal government called the Senior Executive Service. It's the equivalent to being an admiral or general in the military. As a matter of fact, just like admirals, generals, we get our own flags." So I was able to get through that process and become the chief operating officer, my first job for 5 years for the Coordinating Center for Infectious Diseases. But what drove me to that, I had the opportunity now to really do something that I believe helped me to change the world. The big thing from FedEx that led me to be able to change the world, I think, was to actually sign the contract working on a team to create modern vaccine supply chain delivery for the vaccines that save lives around the world. I actually signed the contract that happened. I've always been an advocate of being able to put back. And there are many things that I've done in my career, and one of those is creating the vaccine contract with others, a group of people that put together the contract to create those vaccines that save lives now here and around the world. But I wanted to do something more. I had corporate America, I had made the money, I had the retirement. I wanted to be able to put back into life. And when they reached out to me to become a senior executive, which is the highest level of the federal government in terms of management, I said, why not? But like you said, there's nothing you could have done to prepare me to move from managing in the private sector versus the federal government. And I think you have to learn that leading in the federal government is not the same. It doesn't move at the speed of business in terms of how government processes work. The bureaucracy a lot of times is slow. There are things that do move at the speed of business. For example, vaccine supply chain, which is what got me to the federal government, helping to create a modern vaccine supply chain. But ultimately, creating a whole different set of skills called legislative leadership skills, where you have to be able to have the ability to influence people to get things done, not necessarily having direct managerial authority. For example, when a manager hires a person in the federal government, they don't extend the offer letters. He does that. Finance doesn't work the same way. A whole different set of processes. And so, before I took the job in the federal government, someone said to me, "You might want to, if you want a friend, get a dog, because it's going to be hard to find friends when you move into that environment." And I tell you, it has been the most difficult and the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life. Working with some of the bravest people in the world who put their lives on the line to save lives around the world. But leading people that brilliant, leading doctors and scientists and technicians, my God, that's very difficult. Knowing that you don't have direct managerial authority, that you have to be able to influence, you have to be allies, and it goes back to those skills that I talked about earlier: emotional and social intelligence. Building my own alliances, making sure that when I had difficult things to do, that I had a partner who was my partner in running the Infectious Diseases Center to be able to deliver those messages, and building my own relationships, having skip level meetings, and building my own internal group credibility. It was very, very difficult, but also very, very rewarding. And it was 20 times more difficult leading in the federal sector than it is in the private sector. I tell you, people don't really understand that how difficult it is. There's a book called Good to Great in the Public Sector or Not-for-Profit or Social Sectors. And it's written by Jim Collins, the same person who wrote Good to Great. And it talks about what I'm talking about, how difficult it is to be able to get things done if you don't have the ability to be able to read the room, the social intelligence to build relationships and get things done, not through direct managerial authority, but through legislative leadership skills. Tough, but rewarding. Wouldn't want to do it again, though, Charles.
Oh, I can imagine. So, can you tell us what was the most difficult chapter to write and why?
The most difficult chapter to write in the book to me was the day I saw my father die. My mom and dad separated when I was around 10 years old, and for several years we lived with my father. And so when he died, my mother came back into our lives and was able to get us out of a one-bedroom, rat-infested apartment. We got Section 8 housing and food stamps. Herein again, my willingness to and desire to put back, because those are the things that helped me get to where I am through public assistance and public housing. And so the night that my father died, I actually watched him have a heart attack. And as I watched him have a heart attack, my little sister was standing beside me and she was crying, Daddy don't die, Daddy don't die. But he did die. And I actually got up and went to school the next day. And I did that because even though my father was born in 1909, even though he only had like a fifth grade education, he was adamant about us going to school and doing our homework and not playing in the streets like others. I did that because I know that's what he wanted me to do. So that was the most difficult chapter for me to write. And by the way, I didn't miss a day out of school in 12 years. I'm very thankful for the fact that, the village that surrounded me supported me during that time. But watching him die, that was a very difficult chapter to write.
Oh, wow. How has the book been received by readers and peers at this point, as you know of?
Well, I've floated, when I was writing the book, I would share chapters with my wife and I would share chapters with certain people. And I'm not one to believe that I have any great skill. But the feedback that I've gotten so far is that I'll give you an example. One of the people that I admire the most and one of my close friends, his name is Judge Gino Brogdon. And I asked him to give a testimony as part of the book when it comes out. And what he said to me was one of the greatest compliments I think that I've ever gotten as it relates to my writing. And that was, Mebane writes with the skill of an expert trial lawyer, where it puts you right into the middle of the action and you experience the story as you go through it and as you read it. That to me was,
Oh, wow.
made me feel good, and that he himself is a great writer. And for him to say that, it made me feel real good. And then there's another person that I admire a lot who is a scientist and a doctor at the CDC. His name is Dr. Steve Solomon. I asked him to give a testimony as well. And he, too, gave me some feedback that I value and will value for the rest of my life. And he is the one that pointed out to me that you really need to publish this so that others can learn about the struggle, the resilience, and how to overcome. Here he is, a person that I grew to know and love as a friend at the CDC, a respected world-class science and admiral in the public health service, giving me that kind of feedback. But I'm the toughest critic on myself. I think that I've gotten better over the years. Those books that I mentioned, Charles, that I wrote earlier, I'm kind of glad I took them off the market. They were kind of need a little work, but I've gotten better and I'm getting better. I write once a week, and I'm always listening. I keep the recorder on my phone with me. And so when I hear a phrase, if I read something, I record it and I go back. And once a week, I spend 2 hours, dedicated to making sure that I put those words in front of me. And that's how I get the ideas for the stories that I write. But I'm always writing and I'm always getting better.
Oh, wow. So tell our audience, when is the book coming out, or if it's come out, and where they can actually get it?
It actually came out yesterday, November 8th. What's the day? 10th. It came out on November 8th. And now you can go to the website, which we'll publish here, WP Publishing, who is sponsoring me. And also, I wanted to choose a publisher like WTP Publishing because I wanted someone, first of all, who understood the struggle, not only the struggle, but as a African American, male in today's society, but someone who got that part of it as well as a person who gets me. So I spent a lot of time with the founder, Kim Jones of the company. We become close friends, but he gets me. He's patient with me, but he's also a hard taskmaster. But the book came out. We've been going back and forth over the whole summer to get it out now, and we're very proud of the product. It's being printed as we speak, and people can use the website and the QR code that you have in the advertisement to be able to order the book and get it delivered.
Okay. So what do you hope young Black professionals take away from your memoir?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that because I think one of the greatest challenges we have is that the generational challenges you got, in the workplace, for example, five, six different generations, and I think the whole idea around diversity and being able to communicate across generational lines, and you always would hear the older people say, well, you young kids don't get it when we were growing up. And, sometimes we say the same things about the next generation and the next generation, and especially the digital native that grew up now with the digital footprint and living their lives online. I hope they get to understand that it's not just about what you put out in the public. There's more to life than being online and what you present to the public. You're actually just presenting a story. The real truth is behind the scenes. The real truth is being able to climb the mountain, to overcome the struggles, but to enjoy the journey and the view as you go along and to try to make sure that the world's a little bit better off because you were here and the things that you did and created in terms of your legacy. I want young people to learn that when you face failure, when you feel isolated, if you're facing depression in difficult times, sometimes we're dying of thirst standing in the middle of the river. There are resources around you. Reach out, be able to use your village and others to be able to overcome those struggles. And sometimes you think that when something happens to you, like when my dad died, I thought that was going to be the end of the world. My mom died a couple of years ago. But I learned that those kinds of things are not the end of the world, that we should value those relationships while we have these people in our lives. But sometimes all the difference can be made in just being able to persevere and to hang on and to muscle through the challenges of life. There's so much more to life than what's happening today. Don't get caught up so much in today and forget that there's an entire world ahead of you. That's why when I was a young kid, I used to, we only had a black and white TV and we couldn't afford a color TV charge. So we would take like an orange sheet of paper, cellophane. That was our color. I would say sometimes we were so poor we couldn't afford music on the radio. We just look at the radio. But when I saw these movies about people in other countries, I used to watch those Bing Crosby movies and the travel movies and the travel logs and National Geographic. I said, one day, I want to see the world like that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. Just got back from Malta about a month or so ago. Was in Vancouver. I've traveled to so many different countries I've lost count. But see the world and understand that there's one thing to be in the digital world. It's another thing to be a slave to the digital world. It's okay, to be engaged on social media, but don't be a slave to the phone. Look up, learn to smell the roses and enjoy and create the moments and savor them, and also try to make sure that you're engaged in life fully outside of what's happening in the digital universe.
Well, let me just go over here first, and I want you to know that we've got several comments here in the chat, and one of them is from the first few is from Rashad Helton. The first one is he says, "Good evening." I'll put it on the screen.
Mhm.
He says, "Good evening,"
Good evening.
uh, and then this next one is, "Pleasure to be here this evening." And we go down to I guess this was a part of our conversation where he says,
Mhm.
"Oh wow, it was an interesting title." He was talking about your book, and then he goes and he says, "Congratulations." That is, I'm sure, about the launch date.
Mhm.
Um, and so my next one is, where are you? This is on the screen here. He says interesting. Um, let's see. He goes here with this one. He says humility at its finest, and um, go with you know it says learn how to survive because actually, which I wanted to come back to you on, is
Mhm.
that what you wanted young professionals to learn. I would think the one thing that they should take from, at least, especially when you were giving that synopsis as to how you guys were living, is that they should take resilience from your
Mhm.
story because I mean, there's lots and lots of strength and to get to this point and to come through that, and to be able to tell this story in a way that everybody should understand it.
All right.
um, he says here, so very true. um, Valuable life lessons learned. And he also, this is a longer one here. He says understanding the name of the game,
Mhm.
reading the room, and understanding the puzzle pieces and how they all fit together.
Right.
So, with these, if you like, I mean, is there anything that you like for Rashad to know with these comments that he's given out that you'd like for him to take from any of this?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Rashad, for being engaged and for listening and giving me this real time feedback. I want to share something with you, Rashad, that is. Uh, there's a chapter in the book when I was about my first day of school, and it's called character building, and it was the way I was raised. And so not only how I was raised, but how my wife and I have raised our daughters. Our daughters have black belts in karate, respect for authority, integrity, perseverance, self control, those things you learn in discipline and karate. But when I was my first day of school, Rashad, I was sitting, I'll never forget, first row, third seat. And I was a mama's boy, and I was sitting there and I was crying. And so my first grade, Miss Brady, I'll never forget, she came over to me and she put her arms around me, and I'm whimpering. She says, as I sat there, this is from the book, and this is how I think my character was built a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. I sat there whimpering in a whiny voice with the staccato cries until she motioned me to her desk. It was the first day of the first grade, and I missed my mom. I tried to explain to her through the sobs in my throat that, I really missed her and I wanted to go. Her blank expression and gentle touch and calm demeanor were like breadcrumbs, leading me and inviting me to open up and to spill everything, to believe, if only for a moment, they would all be okay. This is Mr. Brady talking to me. There, baby. It's going to be all right. Come here. I want to introduce you to someone. She coaxed me and I complied. She held me gently in one arm and opened the desk drawer, and she said, I want to introduce you to my friend. So slowly, she pulled a 2 foot long razor strap from its home inside the shower desk drawer. She said, Mebane, you see this strap? Her sharp and dangerous tone was very different now. She struck me like an assassin's bullet from a silenced gun. His name is Mr. Fix-It. Now, if you don't stop that crying and foolishness, you and he are going to get to know each other very well. You hear me? I stood there stunned and blindsided by the sting of her emotional betrayal. Yet it felt familiar. After 6 years spent ringside of my father's three-ring circle of a home, I could still see her hypnotic glare today. My GPS, the ghost at the table, screamed to me, "Shut the hell up, get back to your desk and comply." And I did exactly that. And like I said earlier, I didn't miss a day out of school. I was a model straight A student with picture perfect attendance. I had the luxury also to witness Mr. Fix-It being used on other people. So you're never going to get me. And I behaved myself. And I learned early on that, resilience, sometimes change, you might not like it, but you have to be able to move through it and move on. And that's what she taught me early on. And all my teachers were that way. They were very strict disciplinarians, but the mere threat of me getting a beating was enough to scare me into obedience. And what it did to me on the inside, good or bad, was another story. And I think that was part of the character building. That's what I want to pass on to you, is that The way we raise our kids and learning resilience is very different now. But in the end, if we want to help our children to overcome and to learn these lessons, we have to model the way and show them, and also put boundaries in place so they understand that there are consequences for their behaviors, both positive consequences and negative consequences. But there have to be consequences either way. Teaching your children about responsibilities and accepting authority and respecting authority, I think, gives you a foundation for life. And that's what I learned first day of school, third row, crying in my seat.
Well, there's another comment here. This one from Bishop uh, Hartzell Clifton Shirley, and he wants to know, what did you learn from FedEx?
Oh man, what did I not learn from FedEx? First of all, again, I am so grateful for the fact that FedEx had a policy for promoting from within. They also believed in training leaders. Understanding that it's not just good enough to give someone a promotion in the management. Until I give the manager the training, the resources, and the skills that they need, then I'm responsible for hiring that person for what they do when they perform on the job. So they spent so much money sending us to training. I actually got a chance later on to teach at the FedEx Leadership Institute. I taught coaching and leadership skills to people around the world. But the fact that they had a leadership institute, that they had core values, that when they said to get those packages, they're absolutely positively overnight, they meant it. But also that you would be rewarded, that investing in people, having a promotion policy from within. I took so many training classes, man. I should have 3 PhDs from FedEx. But at the end of the day, it was the foundation for me to be able to move on and to actually be successful in the federal government as well. So there are so many lessons. Servant leadership is the first and foremost thing that I learned from FedEx. Learning that we all have needs as people. And I go back to my background as a psychotherapist and understanding Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First of all, you want to have food and shelter and safety and belonging, and then esteem, and then self-actualization. But that third level of need, here's what I learned from FedEx, that if you take care of your people, you don't have to be perfect. That vulnerability can be a strength. That if your people know that you are ethic, that you care about them and you're trying to do the right thing by them, you don't have to be a perfect leader. You don't have to walk on water. And by becoming a servant leader, in the end, your team will outperform all the others if you just simply continue to try to make sure you do right by them, but also hold them accountable. Just like I was saying with my daughter, there have to be consequences, because you don't want the people that are performing highly in the job to be the people that aren't performing. So you have to put in place boundaries. So all those lessons not only applied in the workplace from FedEx, but in my life.
Well, Rashad puts here in the chat that your book release date was on his birthday. And he says the real truth is behind the scenes. Sometimes you're dying inside, standing in the river, dying of thirst, standing in the river. And he also says, preserve, hang on. There's more beyond the challenges in life.
Right.
And says, don't be a slave to the phone. So, right. But he also says there's gold, that you have gave him several golden nuggets. Good. And so, go ahead. Did you want to say anything?
I was going to say, one of the things that you'll see when you get the book is that I try to give the lessons as you go along, and so several of them I think are summarized in the end. Going back to what I said earlier, in order to be able to change the system, you first got to get into the system, and change comes from within. And when I retired, a good friend of mine, his name is Josh Berlin, he gave me this poem called "The Man in the Arena," and that's what he said, that he saw me as the person on the front line, trying to make sure that I do the right thing and change the world within the systems that I could change. I can't change everything. I can't conquer the world. I can't solve world peace, but within my spheres of influence, within my circles of influence, I have the ability every single day to be able to impact people's lives. Sometimes it's just a helping hand. Sometimes it's just a positive word, but being able to put back. But those lessons you'll see are kind of outlined in the book, and in the end, not only surviving, but understanding that your life is your resume. It's what you do. I don't listen. I don't listen a whole lot to what people say, but I watch how they spend their time. Your life and how you live your life is your resume. And what means the most to you is how you spend your time and who you spend your time with. And you learn in the end, you always have to have a village to support you, creating a personal board of directors. This board of directors may change over a lifetime, but it's a very small board of directors. Just like in any relationship, one person or one mentor can't give you everything. You want to have somebody you can turn to professionally. You want to have somebody you can turn to spiritually, someone you can turn to get financial advice. You got to have a small board of directors to help guide you through the challenges that you're going to face professionally and personally. And you learn also that vulnerability is a strength. I said as a leader and a servant leader, I don't have to be perfect. And Lord knows I'm not. Just ask my wife or my daughters. But in the end, I know that they love me and they know that I'm doing the best that I can to try to make sure I do right by them. And that's how vulnerability becomes a strength because they'll go to the ends of the earth for you if they know that you're authentic. Real estate matters. Where you're born, your zip code. This whole idea of me working in the federal government and for an organization like the Centers for Disease Control, working for the Family Health Centers of Georgia, where you're born can dictate the health disparities, health challenges that you face later on in life. And being born next to a highway or not being able to, or living in a food desert. I lived in a food desert and I know what it takes to be able to have healthy food and how that can create chronic diseases. But your zip code matters, and so being able to break beyond that and try to go back in and work for organizations that change and address those health disparities is crucial. Um, and then your brand matters. You turn on you go to Instagram, you go to YouTube, people are living their whole lives out in public. And for what? In the end, you learn to keep certain things to yourself. Even though I'm not a digital native, I do remain active on social media, but I'm very careful about what I share because once you put it out there in the world, you cannot take it back. And so understanding that your brand matters and who you are and what you put out into the world is your legacy and it's there forever. And be very careful about that. And that's why you need a board of directors, somebody to check and balance you. I can't walk out of the house wearing, mismatched clothes or looking, askew. Somebody's going to check me before I leave the house, hopefully. And then in the end, being able to move beyond your current environment and knowing that you're handicapped by your zip code. That's why when I saw those movies, I said, I'm going to see the world one day. And thank God I was able, I actually became the director of international operations for FedEx and traveled around the world and went to all those locations. And I'm still traveling very vigorously to see the world because I still have friends that live in North Memphis that haven't traveled 50 miles outside of their community. And that's to me is a tragedy, but it's a reality. And so I'm not being judgmental, but I'm saying you're trapped by what's in here and not necessarily by your zip code. And in the end, being engaged not only in your community, but in the world, understanding that today is a gift. Tomorrow is not promised. The biggest mistake we have and that is presented to us is that we think we have time. We don't know. You can do everything right and die tomorrow. So do the right thing and be engaged and appreciate the day for what it is. Be thankful and grateful. Even when we didn't have very much, I never felt that we were poor, even though we were. I always was grateful for what I had, and I always was grateful for the door open to me. And by the way, the doors that were open for me, 90% of the doors that were open for me were opened by women. And that's why I am adamant about not only making sure that we address these issues about mentoring, but making sure that I do as much as I can to open the door for the women that opened doors for me. It was the guidance counselor who helped me to get a scholarship to a New England prep school in the ninth grade. It was the guidance counselors and the teachers that helped me to apply to get a scholarship to a military. So those doors in them were women. And to this day, my little sister, my daughters, my village is strong.
And so Rashad says it's a pleasure to hear your testimony this evening, and he's looking forward to getting your memoir. There's two comments here from Robert Ruiz. He says, very proud of you, Reggie. This is Bob, and I thank you for the opportunities you gave me on my journey to the SES level. Those infectious days were truly infectious, grateful, Bob. Then he says, true leadership comes from the heart through your brain and mouth. Executive presence is critical. Is there anything you'd like to respond to? Would you like to respond to that?
Wow, yeah, I mean, Bob's gonna make me feel so. You just thank you, Bob. When uh, when I came to the federal government, Bob was me on a rotation. He was in the process of becoming a senior executive as part of senior executive service. So I know that when Bob came to me, I really put him through the ringer, but in a way that I felt would be an impact for him for the rest of his life to try to make sure that he was the best that he could. He himself is a great leader, and also making sure that whatever I had, I took him to every meeting. I dragged him everywhere that I could to try to make sure that he saw what I made sure that he wasn't a ghost at the table, but that he was at the table watching us making those decisions so that he could learn in real time. And so for him to say that today, is really goes back to why I believe I'm here on earth. Thank you, Bob.
Yes, sir. And we've got okay. There's one from John Dodd, and he says, "Yes, sir." And there's two final comments here from Rashad. He wants to thank you for your resilience and perseverance, powerful interview and testimony as a young black male professional and current federal government employee. I thank you for the nuggets shared during this broadcast. It's funny how we have similar experiences but different communities and generational areas. I'm a native of Newark, New Jersey, and I know the struggles of what you shared and how I too was resilient in overcoming and getting me to where I am today. Servant leadership is huge alongside transparency and accountability in the industry. Wow. Yes, that's some really powerful comments. I want to thank you guys for sharing, and you can continue to share. Um, so can you tell us um, how did writing this book help you process your own journey?
You know, I think I've been processing my journey since I was a little kid playing in the Dixie Home housing projects. So, you know, so much, me processing my journey is that, I think to to be engaged in life and to be able to reflect on engagement. One of the things that I kid myself about is, the main person that I follow on media is me. When sometimes on your timeline it'll pop up that a year ago or 3 years ago you were doing this. That digital footprint for me, being at that and be able to leave that as a legacy to my family, is what matters the most. Busy living my life, I can't be too concerned about what someone else is doing. And even if I'm not documenting it on social media, every single day presents us with opportunity to be able to impact someone's life. And so you should be so damn busy living your own life that what somebody else is doing doesn't matter to you. And also knowing that, be very careful who you choose. Like I said, no one person is going to be able to give you everything you need in a relationship. As I do marital counseling, Charles, I stopped doing it after a while. I didn't want to be in divorce court. But when people say, well, I found my soulmate, you may have found your soulmate, but do they give you 100% everything that you need in your life? My wife doesn't smoke cigars. My wife doesn't necessarily like bourbon. My my wife doesn't necessarily like history museums. So, you got to go and find this stuff other places in the world. You got to have your life within your relationship and your other relationships outside of your main relationship. No one person is going to give you everything. So being able to have those circles of influence and those circles of friends. Someone once told me, you need to have friends in almost every decade of life. You know, you need to have young friends, middle-aged friends, older friends, so that your perspective doesn't get contaminated and you're living in an echo chamber. If all the time all my friends look like me, if all the time all my friends sound like me, something's wrong with that picture. I pledged Alpha, Memphis State. Now it's the University of Memphis, and to this day, you know, the lessons that I learned in pledging that fraternity and looking up to people like Martin Luther King and others who are alphas meant the world to me. And that was one of the reasons I got hired at FedEx, because the fraternity brother who was in charge of personnel and hiring at the time was an alpha. And so I heard that if you pledged alpha, you got a job at FedEx. And that exactly is how it played out for me. But having those relationships, not just the ones that you are in a relationship or marriage, but having relationships and others that give you that intellectual stimulation, those other things that you need to be around others that aren't like you or don't live with you, so that you can get a very balanced perspective and have a diverse perspective. So your friendship circles need to look not just like very different and very diverse.
So, what role does vulnerability play in leadership?
It plays a role of showing us that, like I was saying earlier, Charles, I don't have to be perfect. I remember one time working the night shift. We go out. Uh,
Oh, wow.
we work the night shifts out, happy hour. Then we go to work. Well, that was not such a smart thing to do. So one time I'd had a little too much and I went into work anyway, right? And I was the team leader at the time.
Okay.
And so I was so torn up that I sat down in the middle of the operation on the floor. And do you know that my team surrounded me so that the manager couldn't see me? They sneaked me out the back door to the clinic and were able to get me home because I was vulnerable, because I'd been vulnerable, because they knew that I cared about them and was trying to do the right thing. They in turn saved my job. And so vulnerability can be a strength. Vulnerability can be a strength if, you know, I'm married. I got twin daughters, and I always felt in my household there was a vast right-wing conspiracy against me. I'm the only guy in the house, right? So, but it's always us, them against me. I felt that way, but in the end, I learned that the way I say things, how I communicate, especially with my daughters and my wife, is very different than I do sometimes. I learned to be able to communicate. A softer side of me has come out when, especially as I've gotten older and been married for over 30 years. The way I see the world and the way I think. When I was at the military academy, I was it was all black and white. Yes, sir. No, sir. Sir, may I ask a question? Sir, may I make a statement? But then you get out of that and you're a black and white guy living in a gray world. The world is gray. It's not always so clear cut. It's very nuanced, and so is communication. And so being able to learn those kinds of skills and being vulnerable and admitting when I'm wrong and being able to say, I'm sorry. Those are the kind of things you learn in terms of being vulnerable. And also just telling the truth at the end of the day. I have been able to, when I was working for a terminate people, and people say thank you, because I did everything I could to try to make sure they had the tools, the training, and the resources, so that by the time it came around having to terminate them, they were thankful that I had given them the opportunity. And to this day, I still have people who worked for me 20 or 30 years ago still reaching out to me, asking for advice and guidance, etc. So because I was sincere and because I was vulnerable, I didn't have to be perfect. And that made an impact. And also remember that.
Wow. So, when you just think about that and you think about that team that you put together, did you have any thought processes at all when you was assembling that team, or did they kind of like just come to you just by chance?
Being a leader, especially in corporate world and in any organization, you don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to choose the people on your team. So, like any great master painter or master sculptor, you have to work with what you've got. And it's understanding that most of the people, it's the cast of characters in every organization, in every company, in every organization. You got this cast of characters, and you can find them anywhere. I did this in an American Management Association class a long time ago. You've got your champions, about 10%. It doesn't matter who they're going to work for. They're going to be great employees regardless. You've got your survivors, those people that are in place, just, waiting around. The majority of the people are the ones who are there that are holding up the organization. 80% of the folk want to do a good job. And you also have your Brutuses. Brutuses come in two types, the overt kind and the covert kind. With the overt kind of where they're coming from, they're out loud about it. But the covert kind, they're kind of patting you on the back to find the soft spot to stick the knife. So those are the ones that are most dangerous. But you have to your Brutuses and your least best employees as fairly and as equitably as you do your best employees. And if you do that, but you also put in place consequences for behaviors on the job to hold people accountable and also to reward them when they do a good job, you can manage any group in any organization by dealing with that cast of characters. And so it doesn't matter where you are, you have to deal with the cards that you're given as a leader and the teams that you're given. Unlike in your family's your family. You can't excommunicate them, but you work with what you've got. And you will find that if you do that and you're authentic and you're holding people accountable and also rewarding the people that are doing their best, that those people who are not doing their best, those Brutuses end up becoming outliers. And so they end up kind of hanging themselves and outing themselves and either move on or you move them on. So you have to deal with what you've got. Those are the lessons I learned from FedEx and through management training. There's a difference between managing and leading. These things and you lead people. Management is a discipline. Planning, organizing, staffing, developing, controlling. Those are the disciplines that you find in management. That's what you go to school to learn how to do and to manage things, budgets, etc. Leading is an entirely different story. I think the Bible of leadership is what I use when I taught at the FedEx Leadership Institute. And even today, I still refer to it as the leadership challenge. Those lessons that you learn that translate into leadership skills and behaviors across all sectors, public, private, or the government. First of all, it starts with modeling the way, creating a shared vision, empowering others to act. Those are a few of the leadership traits that you see that it really doesn't matter if you're in the federal government or the private sector. Those behaviors and leadership challenge, and the book is by the authors Posner and Kouzes. You learn that those are the things that you learn as a leader that are the blueprint for a lifetime. It's called the leadership challenge, with modeling the way, walk the talk. And then making sure you create an environment where you train and give people the power to be able to act they need to do. I used to always say, Charles, on any given day, challenging the process is part of that behavior. On any given day, if someone wasn't glad to see me come in or happy to see me leave, I've not done my job. So putting in place the consequences, both the positive consequences and the challenging consequences that hold people accountable to what you do as a leader. And you will be successful where you're leading, whether it's the church, whether it's in the private sector, or whether it's in the government.
So let me ask you this, because one of the comments here that Rashad was talking about was that it's difficult to find a mentor, especially in the federal government. How do you mentor, or have you mentored some of your understudies when you were in the federal government? How did they find you, or how did you get to that point?
I started what's known as mentoring circles 20, 30 years ago when I worked once a month. And up until I just retired from the federal government, I ran mentoring circles once a month. My last mentoring circle effort, we had over 200 people that would dial in from across the country, around the Atlanta and Georgia metro area. And I would bring in guests to talk about leadership, about finance, to talk about things in terms of life and lessons, etc. But I found that having mentoring circles creates a greater impact. And also out of those mentoring circles, you develop one-on-one relationships. But the one-on-one relationships that you develop, people have to understand that I'm one part of a puzzle that you need to have as part of your board of directors. I may feel a niche in your life that's is the professional part of your life, but board of directors that you can turn to get the other thing, the intellectual stimulation, the spiritual advice, the financial advice, whatever it is that you need. You're not going to get it in one person because there's no one all in terms of mentoring. You understand that. You choose bits and pieces that you see in other leaders that you want to emulate. And I believe, Charles, that we're our own best mentors in the end. Every great person or every great man or woman that you know or admire, but you also realize not perfect. And there are things that they were lacking. You had to find those things were. So you're your own best mentor, but you're also able to reach out and ask. And will guarantee you, if you reach out to somebody and say, hey, 15-minute phone call, I just want to ask you about this. Even if you reach out to me from this call, I am going to make the time to return that call and do what I can to give you the guidance I think is necessary. And even, now I still have mentoring calls 2 or 3 times a week with people that worked for me 30 years ago and people that worked for me 6 months ago. And so it's not just one and done. To me, it's a way of life, but you have to have the intestinal fortitude to reach out and ask. And most people, if you reach out and ask, will say, hey, I got 15 minutes and be user friendly. Just say, hey, you got time for coffee or you got time for a 15-minute conversation? Reach out to someone on LinkedIn. Hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time? And then you begin to build the mentoring relationship that you need, and also realize that just one aspect of the puzzle. You still need to have other dimensions in your board of directors that you have mentoring you as well. I hope that helps. I was going to say, one of the things that I'm proud of from a mentoring perspective, a leadership perspective, is that on the market right now that's called of career reinvention. Because most of the people that reach out to me professionally want to talk about how they can continue to make sure that they reinvent themselves, especially now. That book, The 10 Laws of Career Reinvention, came out in 2009. The author's name is Pamela Mitchell. It's on the Harvard Business Review recommended reading list, which I'm very proud of because in that book, my story is chapter 5 in that book. They chose 10 people from around the country. Alton Brown from the Cooking Channel is in there, a music producer. Somehow I sneaked in through the cracks, but my story is chapter 5 in that book. And it talks about how I had to reinvent myself once I left the private sector and moved into the federal sector. And there's a lesson in every one of those chapters about the person that is being emulated. That is, you take the tools in your toolbox with you. Everything you need to know to be successful, you will have already learned. You learned it in kindergarten. And one of the books that I recommend from a leadership perspective is Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Think about it. Play fair. Tell the truth. Take a nap. Wash those things. Good hygiene. It's important. So you learn those things early on, but sometimes when life throws you curveballs, you forget that you even know these things. But I think if you look at the 10 laws of career reinvention, it will teach you how. It's a little bit of workbook also to show you already have the tools, how to be able to apply those tools in a realistic way to be successful and move on to the next chapter is what's most important. And you have those tools and those skills already. Being able to have the discipline to put it in play is how the book helps you to be able to see that.
Can you tell us, how do you balance personal truth with professional legacy?
Professional truth with personal legacy
with professional legacy.
To me, it's pretty easy to do that. All you have to do is be who you are and tell the truth and be authentic. Sometimes that means speaking truth to power, but it goes back to social intelligence and emotional intelligence. First of all, emotional intelligence, being able to understand how you relate to others and having empathy, et cetera, is emotional intelligence. The real skill beyond the foundation of emotional intelligence is social intelligence. How to learn to read the room, to know where you are. That's where the ghost of the table comes into play. The little voice inside your head when you're in a meeting and you're debating a topic and trying to make a decision, knowing when to speak out and when to shut the hell up, you know, because again, if you're going to affect change in an organization, first of all, you got to get into the organization to survive to change the system. So, social intelligence, I recommend learn as much as you can about social intelligence. That's the GPS inside of us. It is the ghost. Being able to go environmental scan. You can put me in any scenario for the most part, and whatever I've learned, on the streets or in the boardroom will apply to whatever that scenario is. Because lessons, they become part of muscle and cellular memory. So being able to learn as much as you can about social intelligence, being able to read the room, knowing when to the hell up. Those are skills that you learn through the ghost at the table and the GPS inside of you. And by the way, when I was doing psychotherapy and counseling kids, I had to first understand by the time a child is 3 years old, they develop concrete operational thinking skills. And then by the time the child is about 12 or 13, the foundation usually is set for who they're going to be. That doesn't mean they can't become more. For the most part, their personalities are usually set, by that time. And so you don't have a big window in order to be able to influence and lay that foundation. Learn this early on. Mallory was 3 years old and she used to suck her thumb. And I would come home and I would, see Mallory and ask Mallory, did you suck your thumb last night? Now my kid is 3 years old. She said, did you see me? That's when I realized this child has critical thinking skills. My wife and I decided now it's going to be us against them. And so teaching them how to think critically, because 3 years old, she knew there were consequences for sucking her thumb. So teaching them the boundaries and the consequences, both the positive and the negative consequences. So, those are the things that I think help lay the foundation for us to be successful. But more importantly, reading and gaining social intelligence. That's a skill that you can't from anyone. You have to learn through the lived experiences in your life. But you get it, either get it or you're successful, or you don't and you die.
So, can you tell us what's one story in the book that still moves you today?
Well, there are several in the book that still move me today. But I go back again to when my father died, because I was 12 years old at the time. And my father at that time was the world to me. And I thought, when I used to come home from the park at nighttime, he would always watch TV at night, and you could see the blue TV light in the window. And that light made me know that everything was all right at home as I walked toward our little rat infested apartment. But when he died, I remember having to go to his wake and to his funeral. And this is in the book. And how we drove to the cemetery. And it was cold November day when we drove to the cemetery. Mount Carmel Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee. I'll never forget, we were in the back of the limousine, the funeral car. And why they made us go to the funeral and to the cemetery like that, to me, is a mystery. I think there's all the story behind my thoughts around trauma that's inflicted on children when they take them to funerals and they experience horrible situations like that. I remember it was raining, there was a mist, and we were going away from the cemetery. And on the radio, playing softly on the radio, was a song by the Spinners called, I think it was the Spinners, I'll Be Around. And to this day, every time I hear that song, it reminds me of that day of driving away from the funeral on that cold November day. And for a long time after that, even driving by a cemetery was a trauma for me. And so that story, though, I thought had come to an end because my father had died. But my mother stepped in and stepped up, got us out of the situation. We got the food stamps. We got the, savings. I was able to move through junior high and high school and become successful. All those good things happened after my father died, when I thought the world had ended. It taught me that people are in your life for a brief period of time. Engage and be and enjoy them while they're here. But I think uh, it's in the poem. If no man counts with you, every man counts with you, but no man counts. We have to be able to live our life because in the end, it's you. So as much as you love someone, as much as you're in a relationship with someone, you still have to live with self and be strong enough to move beyond what that relationship is.
So what's next for you as an author?
I'm glad you asked. I have already written a book of short stories. It's called Perpendicular Stories, stories that intersect between life and death. This is pure fiction. There's love, there's murder, there's sex, there's death. There's all kind of good stuff in there. Perpendicular intersection of life and death. And I will continue writing. So that one is almost ready. I got about 21 stories so far, and I got to follow through and get it published over the next year or so. But I will continue to write. My goal is to continue to write for the rest of my life. Now that I'm free and I can go where I want and I can speak and do what I want versus being handy somewhat as a federal executive. To me, this is the dream come true, being able to do these things and to be able to write. I've always, like I said, considered myself a writer. How good I am, I'll let others be the judge of that. But I love to write. I love words. And so to me, I'm living the dream now. I will always write.
So, I know we're not going to be able to get to all parts of what we're going to do or what we wanted to do here in this interview because of time constraints, but I definitely want to have you back. But I do want to go through the transition to the Black History part where we
Okay.
ask who was the most influential person in your life and career. And you mentioned Frederick Douglass. Can you tell us why is Frederick Douglass the most influential figure in your life?
From a historical perspective, it was always Frederick Douglass for me. When I learned that here was a former slave, an abolitionist, an author, a speaker and an orator, a civil rights activist, a U.S. Marshal, a minister to Haiti. Oh my God. During those times, he was married to an African American woman like for 20 years, and then she died, and then he married a white lady. This, you talk about off the chain.
Oh, yeah, especially for them times.
Oh my God. His autobiography, The Narrative of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey Douglass. My Lord. He did it all, and he did it without fear. And he did it in a time where you could get lynched just for having a bad thought at that particular time of white women and others. And being able to speak to the president and the context when he did these things, be hard to find someone else that comes even close to all the things that he did during that particular time in African American history, being a role model. When I visited his home several times in Anacostia, and I'm just, to me, I chose him because of what I just described, the things that he did, and times in which he did it, and the way in which he did it, and his city and his servant leadership mindset, and his never letting us in power hook, trying to make sure that there were equal and civil rights for all. Wow, yeah, that's my guy.
Right. Um, what parallels do you see between Douglas's journey and your own?
I think that his autobiography, An American Slave, I think the parallel that I see is more of a metaphorical parallel in the sense that I think that we all, to some extent, to the way we think. I think that we are slaves to the systems in which we operate. I think that we are slaves to material things that trap us. And knowing that the real value in life is life, and being able to, no matter where you are, even if you are a slave, be able to help others along the way, work hard and do good deeds. And even if you only have a little, as I described, do what you can to try to make it better for others. To me, that's the parallel that I see in breaking out of those bonds of being in the ghetto and, some of the bad things will do around you, not up in those things because those things can ruin your life, whether it's doing drugs or selling drugs or breaking and entering and robbing. I used to do counseling as a psychotherapist with groups, boys, and I learned early on that the company you keep can dictate your life in terms of those influences around you. And so the narrative that Douglas created from becoming from being a slave to becoming an American are the same kind of psychological parallel in my life from some of the things that I had to learn to work around and break the chains around in terms of my seeing that there's a bigger world out there. There's more than just what's up and down the street. There's a whole other world out there, and going to be able to see the world and know that the way we think here in America a lot of times is not the way everyone else thinks, and not to judge others in terms of their culture and their values, but to respect it. Those are the kinds of things that I see as parallels and breaking through from the slave mindset, that people that don't look like me, people that don't think like me, become the enemy. So I used to be a psychiatric case manager for the homeless mentally ill.
Wow.
I used to have to, when there was the deinstitutionalization and they put all these people out of the long-term institutions, they became homeless on the street. There
Yep.
was the Hands Across America grant to hire psychiatric case managers to actually go out on the streets and bring these people back in, try to get them, long-term housing or back into the long-term hospitalization if they needed to. And so when I did that work, before I became a psychotherapist, I used to have to pick people up in my car. People who were living on the bridges, people who lived in alleys. I used to got to go and pick these people up in my own car, bring them into the mental health center, try to get them stabilized on meds and get them into independent housing, long-term housing. It broke down every stereotype I had in my mind. There were doctors, lawyers, teachers, people that I went to school with that I thought were on top of the world, but in the end, life through a curveball and ended up homeless and on the street. And so I'm very thankful because now I look through as much as I can of an unbiased view of others and never judging others, because on any given day, Thoreau said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. On any day, that could have been me. And if I had the opportunity to be able to help, but also I look back to it was a lot of danger in me actually doing that, getting people up that were severely mentally ill, bringing them in and operating in that environment where on any given day, they could have pulled a knife or a gun or anything, and I could have been gone. I did that for 3 or 4 years, picking people up bridges and alleys. And there was a certain danger in that in some of the neighborhoods that I'm traveling in. But the stereotypes broke them down. On any given day, I'm very thankful that it could have been me. I had one person in the book as well. He was a college professor. He had 4 daughters and his wife. He lived in Milwaukee. They were killed in an automobile accident. The trauma, it broke him, and he ended up wandering to Memphis, Tennessee, and I ended up picking him up as a client on the street, in an alley. Broke down every stereotype I had. People that I went to school with, doctors that I knew, on the streets. It could have been me. I'm always reminded of that. So I'm very thankful and grateful.
So, how has Douglas shaped your understanding of power and resistance?
It goes back to understanding social intelligence, when to speak up, how to speak up, reading the room. Douglas had to do that all the time. On any given day, in order for him to be able to talk to the president or be able to get laws and legislation passed, he had to be able to read the room and go into that room at that table and be able to speak the language and know how to maneuver and use legislative leadership skills to get things done. So those legislative leadership skills that he used are the same that I used when I had to go into the federal government as a federal executive, being able to read the room and maneuver and use legislative leadership skills, knowing that I don't necessarily have the power, but if I can build allies, if I can influence others, that's how you get things done. Even though it doesn't move at the speed of business, still be able to maneuver to get things done. That's what Douglas did, and that's what I did.
Wow. So, what lessons from Douglas do you apply in boardrooms and beyond?
The same things that I mentioned earlier. First of all, to to be able to get into the room, you have to come to the table with the credentials. You can't just, for example, when I became the chief management officer or the chief operating officer for the Coordinating Center for Infectious Diseases, I was not a physician. I, wasn't an infectious disease expert, but I was the management officer in charge of that unit, which was run by myself and Dr. Cohen. So he was my ally, being able to build that relationship with him so that when there were tough decisions that need to be made, they didn't necessarily have to come from me. I had to build a relationship with him so he understood what I was trying to do on the management side to be able to effect those things and those changes in the organization. And so I'll say that Dr. Cohen, Mitch Cohen, one of the greatest leaders I've ever known in my life, was one of the greatest influences in me in being able to get things done in that very tough federal environment. And so building those relationships, just like Frederick Douglass did, building relationships with people who had internal credibility. Because there's in-group credibility and there's out-group credibility, outside group credibility. Get that in-group credibility, sometimes you had to have an ally to be able to do that and know how to build relationships with the ally so that they trust you and they respect you.
So, how do you keep his legacy alive in your work?
It's how I live my life. It's testimony. It's what we're doing right now on the cast, Charles. That's how I continue to keep his legacy alive in what I do. I think about him almost every day when I'm faced with a difficult situation. I'll sometimes say, "What did Frederick Douglass do?" And think about what he did, and think about the times in which he did it. And so it really kind of puts in perspective the history and understanding that if I think this is tough, think what he had to do and when he had to do it. And so having that historical perspective helps me to get through most of the problems that we have, problems for the day. Most of the problems that we have, we can get through if we persevere, if we know that there are others that we can reach out to and turn into our board of directors. You don't have to solve everything by yourself. Like I said, sometimes dying of thirst, standing in the middle of the river, reach down, reach out, and have the social intelligence to know when and how to do that, and when to speak up and when to shut up.
So what would Douglas say about today's leadership landscape?
You know, I think that a lot of times when we're in a situation like we're in today, and I have friends that think like this, it's chicken little thinking. The world's coming to an end and it's the apocalypse. I have friends right now that think that way. But I go back in terms of history. I think about the American Revolution, the Civil War. I think about the Great Depression. I think about the changes, the biblical things that happened, that changed the world. We think that because we're in the middle of it, it's the worst thing that ever happened. You can become a slave to that thinking. But I say, don't let it destroy your joy. Yeah, you can get caught up into this cycle where you become addicted to the news media. I only give the news 30 minutes a day, and then I go out and live my life. I hike, I do all kinds of other things. I travel. I think that, because people are in the middle of it, they become consumed by it, and it's a very dangerous thing. But because we're in the middle of what we think is, the most chaotic time in the world, and it's only chaotic because we have all the information at our fingertips. It's always been chaotic. It's always been tough. It's always been difficult. But in the end, it's the end of the world. It will be the end of the world if you think it's the end of the world for you. Your thoughts become your actions, become your habits, become your destiny. It's the way you think that matters. You have to not be a slave to that thinking and not get caught up into following influences that don't really have any substance. You become your own best mentor and don't get sucked into this digital world where you think that it's the end of the world, and it's not. We persevere, we overcome, we keep it moving.
Yes. So, how do you use history to inform your leadership decisions?
I'm what I call a history buff. And my wife will tell you there's not a museum that I will pass up on any given day. Uh, and so I think having historical perspective and knowledge is critical. I have young friends that make a lot of money, but they don't know history. They don't
Mm,
understand, the civil rights movement. They don't understand, the sit-ins and all the challenges and the things that our parents and grandparents went through in terms of the depression and the struggle. And it's that willful ignorance that is dangerous. Study history, know history, There aren't a whole lot of new things that are happening in terms of the problems that we face that are brand new. But if you don't have historical perspective and you operating in a world where you think that because now you're successful, that you can go out and have this power and influence, and not understanding and having the social intelligence to read the room, it's dangerous and it's willful ignorance. Uh, I hear people say, well, if I was a slave, I wouldn't. You don't know what you would have done unless you were there. And then you don't know, because you never know how you're going to react until you walk in that other person's shoes. So
In that,
thinking that versus actually living the experience is a whole thing. But if you don't know history and you, like when you're marching, what are you marching for? What's the agenda? What laws do you want to change? I mean, we got to have these things set in place so we're not just out there running a mile and talking about what we want an agenda and knowing how to get laws and how to be able to get legislation through that make the lasting legacy impact. History, when you look at people, Good Marshall and others, you know history and understand it and not be blind and willfully ignorant.
mm. What does Black legacy mean to you personally?
My family descended from a slave by the name of Tom Mebane. Tom Mebane, and to this day in Macon, Tennessee, is the Mebane plantation. We all descended from this slave named Tom Mebane, who was born in 1806 on the Mebane plantation in Tennessee. And I have 6 binders of information where I can show you, for example, in the 1860 slave census, my family is listed on there as property. I have a relative who was born a mulatto, and he was we're all descendants of the slave plantation owner. So he had we were his kids, and so he was such a gangster that he he would have dinner with the white family in one part of the house, and on another part of the house go have dinner with his black family in the other part of the house. But he had a white kid that had he was born a mulatto, blonde hair, blue eyes, and then he lived. He adopted this kid, so this kid ended up owning the plantation and owning our ancestors. Born a mulatto, looked white, adopted as white, lived as white, on his death certificate of reads Negro. So in terms of legacy, I'm very fortunate in the sense that I had a researcher spend about a year or two putting all this information together. I've got the documentation, the marriage certificates, the death certificates to be able to show where my family came from and our history. And I have passed that information on to my family time and time again. But it's really important to be able to share those stories and those narratives and keep that history alive so that no matter how successful we are, don't forget, on any given day, life could throw you a curveball. You could be homeless, but also appreciate the fact that we came from a slave family to now, to where we are. My younger sister was a CEO and she's a healthcare executive. My nephew has a doctorate in pharmacy and an MBA. And I could go on and on and on about how far we've come, and realizing that success is not where you are, it's where you are from where you first had to start. And we started as slaves. And so when I'm faced with difficult situations in terms of legacy and challenge, I think about, and a whole lot more you can throw at me that's going to be more powerful than that I cannot overcome. I just got to believe and know that if I spend my working on trying to solve the problem instead of being a slave, you'd be surprised how much you can get accomplished and how resilient you can be. There's a book that came out a couple of years ago, Charles, called F Feelings. It was written by a Yale psychologist and a daughter who's a comedian. We're slaves to how we feel. How you feel, the intuition and the intuitive decisions that you make. If you could learn to do a little bit of cognitive restructuring and understand that I don't necessarily have to be a slave to how I feel. Let me stop, think about what the issue is, and instead of getting anxious about what's happening, figure out what's the first step for me to be able to begin to solve this problem. If you can train yourself to think that way, you can throw me any curveball in the world, but I'm not going to allow you to throw me off balance in terms of my feelings. Let me stop and think about what you just said, what the situation is, what's the best way to handle it. Instead of being caught up in my emotions, figure out how to solve the problem. Thinking becomes critical thinking, becomes your best weapon against whatever life throws at you. And I tried to teach my daughters that, and I try to continue to think that way.
So, how do you mentor others to carry that legacy forward?
I have I have a way of working with people where I say, send the elevator back down. If I'm helping you, make sure you're doing the same thing for somebody else. You have an obligation to do that. Every person that I mentor, I make it very clear to them that you have to do it for somebody else. You got to pay it forward. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here. That is mandatory in terms of having a mentoring relationship with me. If I'm doing it for you, who are you doing it for? I'm very clear about that. And that to me is why I'm here. It's the opportunity to be able to be on a podcast like this and share the word. I'm sure that we'll have people who reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure we'll probably have some people reach out to me through your show, but I will return those phone calls. I will make sure, but to also make sure that when I'm talking to you, that you understand at some point you have to pay it forward.
Final question. What's one quote from Frederick Douglass that guides your life?
One quote from Frederick Douglass that guides my life. It's not necessarily a quote from Frederick Douglass. It is the essence of who he was. And I take the essence from who he was from the title of his autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. To me, an American slave symbolizes the American dilemma. There was a famous economist by the name of Gunnar Myrdal in the 1940s, the Nobel Prize, and he wrote this this work called "An American Dilemma" or "The Negro Problem in America." And in that work, he described the problem that we have, that Douglass was facing then and that we face now. That is the inequity that is created by the systems in which we live. And whether people believe it or not, there are inequities in terms of healthcare. There are inequities in terms of civil rights, and we have a responsibility to understand that where you live can dictate how long you live. The Dr. David Williams at Harvard University showed that when you're born in a situation in a bad zip code, a bad part of town, the process of weathering can take years off of your life. That's up to 5 to 10 years in terms of living in a food desert and living in an impoverished district. And so with Frederick Douglass, it's not so much a quote as to his autobiography in and of itself, the narrative of moving beyond slavery to those things that I said that he achieved: a minister, a U.S. Marshal, a civil rights activist, an author, all those things from a former slave. It was the legacy and how he lived his life more than a quote that rings true to me today and forevermore will.
So in closing, what are some words of wisdom and encouragement that you have for our audience? How they can connect with you via your social medias, your website, how they can get the book, all of those wonderful things.
Well, we're going to share those things through WP Publishing so that people will be to me, and through WP Publishing, my wonderful publisher, Kim Jones, is making sure that through social media that I'll be able to respond to people and that we will get back to people immediately. He's done a really good job of trying to make sure social media platform, people can reach out to me, and that we are monitoring that on a daily basis. And I think the one thing that I will leave in terms of wisdom is what I've talked about, this entire time, and that is, it's not the end of the world. Be careful about the way you think. Your thoughts become your actions become your habits become your destiny, and who you surround yourself with and the company you keep becomes your life. Be very careful about who you surround yourself with and the company you keep, and create that personal board of directors. You don't have to fight these battles alone.
Well, I want to thank you for spending this time with us, and especially getting the opportunity to learn more about the book, and also getting to get this wisdom and this expertise that you were giving out. Now, again, as I said, we missed two sessions that I definitely want to have you talk about. I mean, is it possible that we can have you back? Because I definitely want to have you back on the show.
Without a doubt, you know, this is why I'm here, Charles. I
Yes.
want to make sure that, we go through the entire process, and that I spend the time, and that you can get, but also what you're doing for me, I get more out of this than the folk that are listening. I get an opportunity to be able to hear and see and stay current with the world. And to me, it's a lifeline in terms of keeping me inspired and motivated to continue to move. I learned that from my mom. She was in an abusive relationship. My dad was not nice to her. I saw my mom get shot by my dad, when she was running down the street, and she still survived. And so, I'm a survivor. We are, it's in our DNA to survive. And that's what I leave you with. You know, as a slave, if my ancestors could overcome, I don't have any excuse.
Exactly. Well, for those of you that are watching, I hope that you guys got a lot of learning experience and a lot of things that Reginald just put out that you guys really understand and want to learn more. I suggest that you guys find the links that's going to be put out. And for some of those of you that have connected via the links that were put out already, please reach out and get that opportunity to learn more. Learn more about that book. Get the book. But also, the one thing that he mentioned that's so key and so critical is your thinking. How do you put forth your best foot in your way of living life, and what's going to get you there?
Mhm.
Are you trapped in here, or are you free? You've got to make that decision. You've got to make that decision. For those of you that are watching on any of our 8 channels, and if you have not yet subscribed, especially on the YouTube channels, I ask for your support. If you will please subscribe and enable all notifications where every show we have, you guys will be able to catch those shows live. Also, you'll be able to go back and watch all the previous recorded shows where you can get those shows and you can still get the learned experience from those speakers as well. For those of you that have not yet joined our community, please join our community because the community means more than you can ever imagine. That is, you can watch the show there. You can even go on the other side where you can do networking. You can meet other great professionals. You can learn a whole bunch of things from an enormous amount of people, but also you can do posts there as well. I would like for you guys to join that community because also you'll get the opportunity to vote for your person that you decide that you would like to see as the America in Black and White Person of the Year. And also, I want you guys to stay tuned for our new segment that we're going to be releasing next season in season 4. That is our Final Word Friday. So please stay intact. Please stay in touch. Please stay connected. As we here at America in Black and White will continue to color conversations on the canvas of America and connect and grow and expand every underserved and marginalized community around this country. Thank you all. I'm your host, Charles King, and you all have a great evening. Thank you, Reginald.